Today's video is brought to you by .tech Domains, who make it not only simple but affordable to get a domain that encapsulates your brand, such as a Twitch channel or a website to showcase your PC mods. And today you can get 95% off of your domain by using my link down in the description below or heading over to go.tech/Joker today. Hey, what's up guys? Joker here. Today we are going to be revisiting DXR performance in Battlefield 5 as there has been a new patch rolled out, which you may have heard me talk about a few days ago. This patch is meant to add up to 50% performance improvement, at least that is what the marketing is having us led to believe. So I kind of wanted to validate that and also go back and test it, because if there's any type of performance improvement, then it is certainly something worth discussing, because initially when DXR was rolled out for Battlefield 5 just a couple of weeks ago, it was not good at all. It did not leave a very good first impression. But if they were able to fix that, then it's something that we should definitely revisit here. So that's what we're doing in this video. So I went back and I retested Battlefield 5 before the patch actually came out, because NVIDIA also rolled out a new driver to accompany this patch, which is 417.22. So I wanted to retest on that before the patch came out, which I did a couple of days ago, and then the patch for the game was actually delayed by a day, but it came out yesterday, so I tested it pre-patch with 417.22, and then right after the patch yesterday and today in combination with the same exact driver, 417.22. And I was using the same test system as I used in all my previous tests, running a 9900K overclocked to 5 GHz, 2080 Ti Founders Edition with no overclock on that card at all. I just increased the power limit slider on it to give it its best chance to be able to maintain its clock speeds and use GPU boost. And I'm also using 16 gigabytes of G.Skill Trident Z RAM at 3200 megahertz. Now, one of the big things they discussed in the patch notes was how they addressed the effects of foliage. And if you remember the first test that I did, that was one of the most intensive scenes that I was able to find in the game. It was on one of the single-player stories. I think it's called like Tyrolior or Tyrolior, something. I'll spell it on the screen once I could be bothered to Google it. But there's a lot of foliage on screen, and it was having a massive performance impact on using DXR Ray Tracing, even at something like DXR set to low. It was pretty darn rough, even with a 2080 Ti at 1080p 1440p. So that was something that I definitely wanted to retest again, and I'm happy to report that the performance did improve quite a bit when using the new patch here on Battlefield 5, even with DXR set to Ultra. In fact, it gained about 20 frames per second on average between the different resolutions where I tested at 1080p and 1440p. Previously, 1440p couldn't even do 60 frames per second, where now, as you'll be seeing in this side-by-side, that it is able to maintain over 60 frames per second most of the time. I'll go ahead and throw up the graph right now here, and this is all with DXR set to Ultra, and I did retest with Medium as well, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. But this is with DXR on Ultra settings. All the other settings in the game were set to Ultra. As you can see on the left side of the graph, we have RTX off for 1080p and 1440p, where you're going to get the best performance that you will be able to get is by having ray tracing features turned off. Now, once the new patch rolled out, we could see that 1080p got an average of 90 FPS and a 1% low of 73, while before the new patch that came out yesterday, we had an average of 68 frames per second and a 1% low of 58. So we saw a gain of around 20 frames per second at 1080p, and the same was true for 1440p, where now we're getting an average of 70 frames per second and a 1% low of 62. Very playable, versus the previous 1440p that got an average of 49 FPS and a 1% low of 42, which is something that I would have never chose to play the game at, because it was struggling quite a bit and the game just didn't feel responsive. It was not enjoyable for me to play the game at below 50 frames per second, but now, post-patch with the 1% lows even above 60 frames per second, you could conceivably enjoy this game at 1440p with DXR set to Ultra, as long as you are running a 2080 Ti, which, as I said, I was doing for this testing here. Now, medium settings is another thing that was a problem before the new patch rolled out. in fact, just really wouldn't take effect. And when you would go ahead and put it on, it would have virtually no impact to the performance. It would perform within about 1 or 2 frames of ultra settings, which is within the margin of error. So that is something that they addressed with the new patch here. And you can see that going from ultra to medium, again, we get a significant bump in the performance, while the actual visual impact is very, very small. So it seems like running it at medium, even with a 2080 Ti, would probably be advisable if you're wanting to stay well above 60 frames per second. And for the graphs on that, we could take a look at it again here. The RTX off numbers remain the same. I just put it there for a basis of comparison. But after the patch, we got an average of 103 FPS at 1080p, 1% low of 78. While pre-patch, we got an average of 69 and 59, which again, that was about the same as what we got with DXR set to Ultra. So now with it at medium, it's actually making an impact pretty significantly in terms of performance here. As you can see, we gained about 40 frames per second set to medium, which should just show you how little impact it had before the new patch. And at 1440p, we got an average of 84 and a 1% low of 67, while before the patch, which performed almost the same as Ultra, we got an average of 51 FPS and a 1% low of 43. So it would appear playing at medium is probably going to be the best bet for most RTX card owners out there if you're wanting to get the best frame rate possible. And, they talked about, removing a lot of the foliage objects which were actually being ray traced. It doesn't remove like the leaves or any of the foliage from the game. The foliage is still there. Really what these settings and what the new patch is actually doing is affecting which objects are ray traced in reflective surfaces, focusing on more important objects and removing some of the less important objects, which the joke has been made already. The way that they fixed RTX was by removing RTX. And it's true to a certain degree, but as far as, visually and what you see, you really can't see it. So you really can't be too mad at it, as you'll see here with this side-by-side in the same area of the single player. Just looking at the puddle and everything like that, reflections look to be about the same. Even before the patch, I couldn't see the foliage actually reflecting in the puddle, so the fact that they removed it as a potentially reflective object, I guess, really doesn't make a difference whatsoever. And the performance improvement is really good, so I'm pretty happy with this patch. So far. Moving over into multiplayer, though, that is definitely going to be an area where many people are concerned about the performance. So I went back and I did retest on the Rotterdam map here, and the performance definitely got better, although I didn't see as a significant performance leap as what I saw on that single player map. And I think the reason for that is that they focused a lot on fixing that foliage issue, which was with Rotterdam, there's not as much foliage, so we didn't see as much of a gain in terms of performance, but in the single player, it was quite a bit. Taking a look here, again, we could see with RTX off 1080p with the 2080 Ti, this is all DXR Ultra. We see 174 to 123 on the 1% low, 1440p, got an average of 136 and a 1% low of 92. After the patch at 1080p, we got an average of 90 and a 1% low of 74, while before the patch, it was an average of 79 and a 1% low of 68. So we gained 11 frames per second there after the patch, which is pretty decent, but not as much as we saw in the single player, where we gained about 20 to 22 frames per second. And on 1440p, we got an average of 72 and a 1% low of 63. Well, before the patch, it was an average of just 60 and a 1% low of 51. So you would expect to see a lot more frame drops down below 60 before the patch, whereas now at least we're getting a 1% low of 63. Now, this was obviously on a closed map, because the whole point of doing a benchmark like this is that you want to see a strict environment that's going to be the same, apples to apples, one to the other. So I actually did go ahead and jump into a multiplayer match with DXR set to Ultra to see if these performance numbers held up. And sadly, they did not. Actually, when I was playing with DXR on Ultra, I was barely able to maintain 60 frames per second at 1440p on the 2080 Ti. Same everything here, same drivers. This is all post-patch, this gameplay that you're going to be seeing right here. And there were a lot of drops down below 60 frames per second. So obviously, playing DXR Ultra, even in the multiplayer, is still going to be very difficult when you're actually on a 64-player server on the Rotterdam map like I was right here. So knowing what we know about medium settings now and the performance bump you can get from it, I dropped down to medium, and that certainly alleviated the frame rate issues completely. The frame rate was very high playing at medium, and I would say that, as far as just the frame rate numbers are concerned, it was very good. However, there were still a lot of areas where I was seeing hitching, which is not necessarily related to DXR or NVIDIA or RTX cards whatsoever. This is something that I addressed a few videos ago, where I just talked about DirectX 12 and its implementation in Battlefield in general, where it's just not a very good implementation. And when DXR first rolled out, they did quite a bit to address that, and it certainly got a lot better. However, even with DXR set to medium, there were a lot of times where I was running through the map here, and even though the frame rate was, at a very respectable level in the 70s or maybe even 80s, the game would just kind of grind to a halt for like 1 to 2 seconds and then pick up where it left off. And it just really removes you from the experience, which, as I said, that is not, a hit against RTX cards. It's not a hit against NVIDIA. It's really a hit against the Battlefield 5 engine and how poorly optimized it is for DirectX 12. So really my big takeaway at the end of this is, if you want to have RTX and DXR features turned on, the best way to go would be playing with them on medium. However, for me personally, I would still choose to play in DirectX 11 for a couple of reasons. One is just obvious, the higher frame rate, and number two is because DirectX 12 has really bad hitching, and it just removes you out of the experience, makes it very unenjoyable, and in some instances, it can even get you killed in a multiplayer match. I mean, if you're running along and all of a sudden your game freezes for 2 seconds, that's more than enough time for someone to line up a headshot and pop you, and then you're done. So that, for those reasons, in a competitive multiplayer game, I would still not choose to use DXR features, but it definitely performs a lot better than before. But I would still choose to use DirectX 11, where the performance is excellent on the RTX cards. Almost all cards. I mean, so many cards, even the mid-range, perform really well because the engine is excellent at DX11, but DX12, it just really isn't. And that shouldn't take away from the 2080 Ti, because it still performs really good in that. I mean, you could still play this game at 4K, 60 frames per second easily on a 2080 Ti, even if you don't overclock it. So for that, it's absolutely fantastic. But when it comes to ray tracing features, it's still a hard recommend for that, only because the hitching right now in Battlefield 5. But we need to see more games. This is one isolated game that has been known to have issues with DirectX 12 for years now. In every Battlefield game and Battlefront game that has used DirectX 12, it has been a problem. Now, once Shadow of the Tomb Raider comes out with DirectX 12 patch, that is a game that runs really well in DirectX 12. So I have really high hopes for that game, as long as the implementation is good. It's meant to have DLSS and all of these other features. So this is just one isolated game, and possibly not the best game to have been picked for, the initial launch of RTX features. I think once we get into like single player games and we start seeing this, feature implemented more and it becomes more openly adopted, then it will have a good place in games. It really is the future, but Battlefield 5 was just maybe not the best place to start off with it, for the fact that it's a multiplayer game where you don't really need to be staring at puddles, and also their DirectX 12 in the game is just a flaming dumpster fire I would never use it. So I'm going to go ahead and get out of here, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below on the ray tracing patch for Battlefield 5, which, as I said, improves performance, but DirectX 12 still leaves a hell of a lot to be desired inside of this engine from DICE. So, as I said, I'm going to get out of here. If you enjoyed this video or learned something new, don't forget to leave a thumbs up on it down below and subscribe if you're not already. And I will catch you guys tomorrow for another video. Ta-ra. I can't snap my fingers. They're too cold. Sorry. They're like freezing right now. Ooh, I'm going to stick them under my titties and make them warm again. Oh, yeah, that's better. That's much better. You got to. If you're a fat man, you could just take your hands, and if you're really cold, you can stick them under your arms, I guess. But you could also go under your titties, under your belly. That's the joy of being a big man. You've got plenty of places to stick your cold and freezing fingers when you do get cold. So I'm gonna get off camera now and go do all of that. Think about that while you're subscribing and such. Ta-ra.